Good evening. Welcome to our April 5th meeting. It's the first meeting of the month. Our next meeting will be 2 weeks. We have a special guest this evening, Sally Donlon, Kathleen Shott, Espenoza. Both are ardent and avid legislative educators. So we welcome y'all this evening.
Glad to. Thank you very much for being with us. And, we'll turn this all over.
Yeah, that's fine. Okay, our technology is already failing us, but that's what one should expect. I'm Sally Donlon. My colleague Kathleen Espenoza is going to speak to you in just a minute. We've kind of divided up our presentation. I believe that we were asked to come talk to y'all about how to find things, how to work with the legislature, how to find the bills, how to track the bills, if there's something you're interested in, how is it that you know what's going on, how can you take a part in moving bills forward, or at least in having a say about what's going on in the legislature. So the way I think we're going to split it up is I'm going to walk through some of the mechanics of it. I hope it's not too basic for y'all. And then I think Kathleen is going to come talk to you about how we can, you can use those mechanics in pursuit of a goal, okay, with some goals that you have with the legislators and interest areas that you or your organization pursue. Okay. Does everybody know how a bill becomes a law? Okay. Does everybody know the process that it works through? Okay. Nobody raised their hand, so there might be some who do, but this demonstrates how a bill starts in the House side, okay? And I'll try to, can y'all see it? Yeah, okay. Not too well. It starts up in the front. There's what they call a first reading, and that's when the bill is introduced. A legislator has to introduce this bill. It's called the first reading. From there, it's introduced. You would hope that the legislators, once this bill is introduced, all the legislators, or at least their staff, would read this bill. That's why it's called the first reading. From there, it goes to the second reading, and it's referred to the appropriate committee. For instance, if it's a bill on education, it would be referred to the Education Committee. If it were something fiscal, it would go to the Finance or Ways and Means Committee, depending upon where the staff thinks it's most appropriate for that bill to go. So the second reading is when it's read in committee. There is a committee hearing. This is where sometimes you hear that people will go down to Baton Rouge and sit in on the committee hearings. Remember a couple of years ago in some of the education issues, there were all those educators who were going down to Baton Rouge and trying to sit in on the committee hearings to either testify or just make sure that they were a part of what was going on. So that is a committee hearing. The committee then issues a committee report to the entire legislature. The third reading is when that bill is debated on the floor. The rest of the legislators who are not a member of that committee have access to the report. They can read the original bill. They can read the report. All along the way, the bill has been amended or digested, and they're supposed to have read it before it's debated on the floor. That's called the third reading. Okay? Then the next step is there's a vote on final passage. From that point, two things can happen. From this point, it becomes like chutes and ladders, the chutes and ladders game, right? It can either be passed. If the bill is passed, then it's sent on to the Senate floor. This is a bill that begins in the House, okay? If it fails, two things can happen there too. It can either be reconsidered, sent back or sent back to committee to get changed up a little bit. So once a bill fails, it doesn't have to die. Members of the legislature, especially the author or any member of the committee, actually any member of the legislature can say, look, let's take it and let's work on it. This is where you may have heard of riders to a bill. Anybody familiar with that term? Sometimes people will stick things, other bits onto a bill to try to make it more palatable for the vote, okay? And sometimes what happens is those riders that are stuck onto the bill have absolutely nothing to do with the original bill. For instance, you might have a bill about education. We'll just talk about education. and if it's, the bill itself is strictly about education or an issue within the broader field of education. If that bill fails on its first vote, it may be taken back and said, okay, I'm going to stick in a few things. Some legislator may say, I'm going to stick in a few things that will make this more palatable. If I say this, add this thing to it, then this particularly resistant group of legislators may decide to vote for it, okay? That's where we get all these funny things. You hear a lot about this coming out of Washington, that this stuff that's stuck onto them. You wonder, why could they not vote for that bill? And what would happen if you would go to look at the actual bill and how it's been revised over time, you would sometimes see that that bill that has a certain title and started out a certain way has ended up, by the time it comes to vote again, resembling not at all the original bill. And sometimes the language actually works to the detriment of the original intent of the original bill. So sometimes when you're watching the news or whatever, and you hear that somebody rejected this bill, they didn't want to vote for this bill, and the headline, the title of the bill sounds great, you don't really know enough. You have to go in and read the digest, how the bill has changed over time, and what has been added to that bill to try to get people to act on it favorably. It's the worst kind of gerrymandering you can imagine. We gerrymander with our districts, but we also gerrymander with our bills. We stray far from the original intent sometimes. So just keep that in mind when you look and you say, oh, gosh darn so-and-so, he should have voted for this bill. How can he not support this? Well, it may be something in the bill that's a poison pill, okay? So this is where we are right now. If it's failed, it may be reconsidered, or it may receive no further action. Okay? If it receives no further action, it's just dead. Or if it's passed, it'll go right on to the Senate. And once it gets to the Senate, the same thing happens all over again. It's introduced in the Senate. That's like your first reading. It's as if the author first wrote it and distributed it to his colleagues in the House. It goes to the Senate. That's the first reading. Everybody gets a copy of it. Again, you hope that that senator, or at least that senator's staff, reads the bill, digests it, understand what it means, and at least briefs the senator on it. Then it's referred to committee. Again, goes to a committee on the Senate side. They're supposed to read it very closely. That's the second reading. Then there's a committee hearing. Again, the same bill. You can go down to the legislature and sit in on the committee hearings. You can sign, are they blue cards? Are they still blue cards? You can sign the blue card to testify in front of the committee if you'd like to, or you can just sit there and take your notes and try to hold them accountable. Then from there, the committee issues a report, just like the Senate committee issues a report, just as the House committee did. And then, but in this case, it's reviewed by the Legislative Bureau. It has to go through some checks and balances to make sure it's a legitimate bill. If passed, if it could become a legitimate act or a law. And then after that, finally, it leaves committee, it goes, it's debated on the floor. Once again, that's your third reading. So the same thing happens. You see, it starts in the House, it goes through these three readings, then you send it over if it's still alive. We say alive. We talk about a bill as if it has some agency of its own, as if it's a person. That's why there's a little, well, not this one, but some of these, you see these little graphics and it's like a little person walking around. It's as if a bill has agency. If it's still alive, at that point, it gets sent to the floor. It's debated on the floor, and then they vote, the final passage. Once again, if it's passed, it's sent back to the House, and if it fails, it may be reconsidered, just like it could in the other House, and or it could die because it receives no further action. At this point, too, riders could be attached. The Senate members could attach riders to a bill. Okay, so this poor document has gone through this whole circuit of the House, and then and at the end, it can be changed. Okay, then it gets sent to the Senate. It goes through that whole three readings. It could also be changed at the end of that, so that by the time you get to here, it may not even resemble the original bill, but it still carries the same title. Okay, so you just need to watch for that. All right. If it's returned without amendments, it's sent to the governor, or if returned with amendment, the House concurs. They say, okay, we can agree with the changes that the Senate made, and then they send it to the governor. At that point, or it can be returned with amendments and the House rejects and sent to conference committee. In other words, if If people don't like it enough, it gets bandied about back and forth, like volleyball. It goes back and forth until somebody says, until some agreement is reached, and either the House rejects or the bill fails, or no agreement and the bill fails. Okay? If it succeeded, if it survived all of this, then it gets sent to the governor. The governor has a choice. The governor, the bill will become an act if the governor signs it. Okay? All he has to do, it comes across his desk, all he has to do is sign it. If he vetoes it, it can still become an act or a law, but 2/3 of both houses have to approve it, to override a veto. That's what overriding a veto means. That's awfully difficult to do. Okay, 2/3 of both houses must do it. Then the third option, the tertium quid, and this is what we've had governors do a lot in the past. If a governor does not sign or veto within the constitutionally prescribed time period, it will become an act or a law anyway. So, number one, he can sign the bill and it becomes an act. He can just let it sit on his desk and not do anything to it, and it becomes an act or a law. Or he can veto it. And if you can rally 2/3 of the members of both houses to counteract that veto, it will still become a bill. Okay? This is just a little housekeeping. Acts enacted during the regular sessions, which is what we're in right now, become effective on August 1st, or on the effective date stated in the act. Usually there's not an effective date. That's kind of unusual. So when our legislature breaks, when June 6th this year, are we breaking on June 6th? Those bills and acts and laws that they pass will not automatically be in place. It's not until August 1st. Okay? Acts enacted during the extraordinary session, what we call special sessions, the one that just ended, become effective on the 60th day after the body adjourns. All right, now, we just went through all of this about how a bill becomes a law if a member of the House of Representatives introduces the bill, okay? But that's not the only way we can get bills. Same type of thing happens in the Senate. Any senator can introduce a bill, okay? Now, and here's an important thing that you need to know about this. Senators and members of the House of Representatives author bills or sponsor bills, but very, very often members of their constituency take a position or help, they kind of push it along. Members of the constituency can do it, lobbyists can do it, and lobbyists do it, and they bring a lot of money to the table, which is why we believe that it's very important for just regular constituents like us to understand what's going on down there. So it's not just the folks who have the money vested interest pushing these bills, right? So that's one reason that a lot of folks are interested in following the bill so they can see where they're going and maybe putting their own input into the process. So that's how a bill becomes a law. There's a couple of, I happen to think that Louisiana actually has a great website for the legislature. I spent a few minutes today because I was really busy, but I spent a few minutes trying to imagine what I might want to look up for the legislature that I couldn't find on our website, and I really couldn't think of anything. So if I don't blind myself with this light, I'll try to click on one of these. Okay, this is the main site for the legislature. Okay, here. It's showing here, but not. Hold on, second technological glitch of the evening. The second one, I'll tell you what these are. This is the home site for the legislature, and if we can get it connected, it's connected here. It's just not showing here yet. We'll kind of walk you through the various things that you can get on the site. The second one is how to actually register. So if you've identified, got it? Okay, great. Thanks, Kathleen. My technical assistant is here. Okay, so this is what it opens to. Scroll down here. Can you scroll down a little bit for me? Yeah, okay, right here. So if you look, it says today's meetings. This was for today, April 4th. The House Committee meetings, it shows you all the House Committee, the Appropriations Subcommittee on Business Development. Next one is Transportation, Highways, and Public Works. Goes all the way through. Civil Law and Procedure, Commerce. They're all listed up here. And it tells you exactly where they are and when they're meeting. Okay, it's late in the day, so now they've all adjourned, right? And then here's the Senate Committee meetings. Can you click on this, view upcoming meetings? Okay, so this will tell you the weekly schedule. So how come this is still saying the 4th?
Monday probably goes down, Tuesdays, Wednesdays.
Yeah. Okay, if you scroll down, it'll give you the schedule for the week, okay? So if there are some particular bills that you're following, and you know, which you can find out on the website, when those bills are coming in front of the committees, that's how you hear about folks who are going down to the legislature. That's how they know to go down there, because it's all laid out here for you. They don't take up any bill that has not been scheduled before a committee, okay? They're not going to support, not that I know of, huh? Okay. All right, so go down again. Let's click on something else for them. Yeah, that's what I mean. I'm going to get to the top. Okay, so this is the order of the day. They adjourned today at 6:02, the House of Representatives, and there's an order of the day. If you click on that, it will show you everything that happened in the House of Representatives that day. Okay, here's the just the regular stuff, roll call, prayer, just like we do here, Pledge of Allegiance, all that stuff. And then you get into all of the various bills that were covered in committee today, so you know what happened, okay? And it goes all the way through all the committees, you know everything that happened. You go back once, so we get to the Senate, show them what happened in the Senate. Okay, now on this side, that was the House of Representatives. On this side, it says that the Senate will convene on Tuesday the 5th, and here's the Daily Digest. It's kind of the same thing. Senate bills on second reading to be referred, okay? So these are all the bills that are in the second reading. Remember, we went through that little process here. The first reading on the floor, the second reading is by committee. Okay, these are all the bills that are in committee, because that's what the second reading is. And then House bills on second reading to be referred. I guess those were Senate bills. They took up their own bills first. So here's the House bills that they're going to read in committee, and who's bringing them. The bill number, very important. Ooh, yeah, the bill number right here, so you always know what the bill number is. Okay, can we go back to the main page again? Okay, across the top, you can see bills is good. 2016 regular legislative session. This is one way. There are 2 or 3 ways to get to this page on this site. If you know your bill number, okay, you can search. And there's the bill, okay? Here is the text of the original bill. Here is the digest, which is what happens after it goes through the legislative staff digest for the regular session. Okay. The point being that you can, if you know the number one, if you know the number of the bill, you just enter it right there. Just 1 second. And if you, this is Senate Bill, SB stands for Senate Bill. Here's the number right here, and then you just hit the search. But let's show them if you don't know the number of the bill, but you're interested in a committee. Great, okay, let's find education. Okay, then you hit search. These are bills that have been referred to committee. Okay, and you can see where they are right here. This will tell you where everything is. There is no reason that you for not to know what anything that's being considered by the legislature at any time, because it's all up here, and it's packaged 4 or 5 different ways. If Kathleen would go back to the bill, she looked it up by committee. You can look it up by author. If you know or you have heard that a particular legislator is going to introduce a bill, you can look it up by his name. You can look it up by subject matter, right? So there's absolutely no reason not to know what's going on with the bill. Okay? Now go back, what we'll do is we'll just do the main page. Okay, now, a lot of this stuff, I don't want to take the whole night because I want Kathleen to be able to talk to you about some actions that she's taken using some of these mechanics. But just to show you, like, if you click on House or Senate, it gives you all the information about everybody who's in, what'd you click on?
House.
Okay. Oh, they have a pretty website, right? Okay, so it'll have all their committees up there, House officers, House staff. Sometimes it's difficult to get in touch with the legislator. It's also a very good strategy to get to know the staff. So you can identify them up there. Okay. Citizens Guide, press releases. This is a constitutional amendment, Louisiana laws. Okay. Can I go back? I went over the main page again. Oh. Okay. What happens if you go to Senate? Let's do Senate. Maybe not. It's okay. The only thing I want to do now is show them how to register for the bill. So if we go back to the, actually the link on your thing. So everything is up here. It's kind of hard to go through every possible venue to get it information in 30, 40-minute presentation, but it's all up there. If you click on this is how do I sign up to track bills you're interested in. You can click on this link. Okay, let me tell you what it does while she tries to get it up. There's two ways, well, many ways to do it, but there's two main ways you can do it. One, you know the bill number, you know who's sponsoring the bill, introducing the bill, you know what the subject is, all of that, and you can go in there and you can search for it this way, manually. Every time you go in and search for it. Or you can sign up to track the bills you're interested in. Once you find out what those bill numbers are, whether it's HB for House bill or SB for Senate bill, you can, there's a little form, it would pop up, it would certainly on your home computer, it would take your name, your information, and register you. You would just insert those particular bills that you were particularly interested in following, and it would send you information, all that committee action and all the reading action, the votes on it, because it's tracking it for you. So I think this is a wonderful tool. Don't you like that? Yeah. So I don't know whether it's going to pop up, but it's not. But if you just go to the website, and it is legis.law.gov, legis.law.gov, and that's that main page we took you to. And from there, you can find that button that tells you how to register to track a bill. Okay. So that's in a nutshell and a quick blow through how to track bills through the legislature and a little bit about how they work. But I also want to point out to you, would any of you have this PAR guide? A Public Affairs Research Council? Who has a PAR guide? Anybody? Okay. It's a wonderful publication. It's free. Unfortunately, like all printed documents, it's out of date as soon as it's published, but it's a good starting place. Really what gets out of date is there are names and backgrounds on every legislator in here. There's your own little graphic on how a bill becomes a law. And there's information on everything, where the districts are. But most importantly, it tells you who's on which committees. Unfortunately, that's also the part that gets outdated the most quickly.
Where do you get those?
I'm going to tell you that. Good question. Where do you get these? You get them from PAR, Public Affairs Research Council, okay? And we kind of put this together quickly. We were approached to do this about a week ago. I can try to get 40 or 50 of them and bring them to another meeting. Clearly, I don't have them tonight, but I see a lot of the regulars here right now. And I could call PAR and ask them, would you like me to do that, Carol?
That's good.
Yeah, okay. It's free. There is the website is www.parlouisiana.org, but I'll try to get these for you, okay? It's just a handy little guide. Once you you start with this as your baseline, and then you can use the website to go back and see who's on which committees when.
I forgot to take a screenshot of
Ah.
that page.
Oh,
So
that's
that's
good.
what I did.
Oh, this is it?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Okay, so this is what's telling you what you need. How do I create an account? You're gonna open that link, and it's gonna ask you, you need to develop an ID, a password, like everything else, right? Insert your name and your email address, and then you'll be put in a system where they start sending you updates on that bill those bills that you've identified, okay? So that last one about things you can do?
Yeah, that's mine.
Oh, that's yours, okay. These are the folks from Lafayette. Kathleen's going to get up and talk to you. The Lafayette, not Lafayette, our legislative delegation. And Kathleen, I think, is going to talk to you about specifically working with these folks in a pursuit of a goal.
All right, so I thought I would just go through a relatively short list of ways that you can influence the legislative process, and I thought I'd bring some of the experiences that I've had, and I talked with a few groups that I know and things that they're doing to influence the legislative process. So I have a short list, and you know, I feel like I'm sort of preaching to the choir. I think you being here are probably already active and engaged and aware. But these are some specific things that with groups that I'm engaged in, or like I said, people that I know, things that you can do, take a more active role if you have a particular issue that is really important to you. So one of the things that you can do is actually encourage a legislator to sponsor a bill, and I think we have someone who's in fact done that here. And that's one of the things that my group, the group that I'm involved with, People, Power Public Education Lafayette, a couple of years ago, we went to one of the area legislators and we basically pitched a bill. We said, we have an issue with a particular type of charter school. We think that they take a disproportionate share of tax dollars. There's not enough accountability and things of that nature. So we essentially pitched our issue. And hoped that he would be willing to go to his legislative aide and write a bill, and then it could go through that process. As it turns out, he actually didn't do it, but we had another legislator who was willing to do it, and at that time, that was Representative John Bell Edwards, who actually took that bill. We got it through the House Education Committee, but we did not get it any further than that. However, this bill has come up. That was probably 2014. It came up again in the 2015 legislative session, and a version of that bill is actually coming up again, I think next week, perhaps. So that's one of the things that you really do feel like you are taking a very active approach in this, what appears to be a very complicated process. Another thing that a group can do, if you have a group of like-minded people, you can schedule a lobbying day at the state capitol. And I know that there's a group in Lafayette called Moms Demand Action, and they are advocating for common sense gun legislation. And one of the things that they have done, they did actually last week, was they had a lobbying day where they got a group of people. They encouraged their membership to go to Baton Rouge. They set up a table. They had some literature, some information, and so they shared it with people who were at the Capitol, but they also took the time to meet with any legislator who would be willing to talk to them. And when you go to the Capitol, it can be very intimidating, and there are people running around, and you see legislators moving around. But that's one of the things that I've come to realize is that these legislators, they're working for us, and that is the job that they're supposed to do, is meet with their constituents. So a lot of times you're sort of standing at the edge of the House or the Senate, and in some way you have to communicate to a legislator that you want to talk to them. You simply want to plead your case. You want to plead your issue. So that's one way in which you can become more engaged in the legislative process. One of the things that you can also do is contact the legislative aide, and their email addresses are available. Many times I've called senators and representatives to basically lobby or take a position on an issue. Yes, I hope the senator votes for this bill, or no, I want the senator to say no to this bill. But you can also say, I'd like to schedule a meeting. And I have We met with the representative to try to ask him to write the bill. I've met with a handful of local area legislators, and in fact, I've gone to Baton Rouge, and it seems very informal. You catch them in between their movement from one committee meeting to another, and they'll walk you into a little room, and you sit down, and you basically have about 5 minutes to sit down and say, hey, this is what I really want you to hear what I have to say. I really want you to know that I care a lot about this issue. This is the support we have in our community. And they can, they take that, they take that how they take that. Either that this is an issue that's important to them, this is an issue that they'll consider, or maybe they have an alternative position on it. I've met with legislators in Lafayette at their offices where they've been invited, and these are legislators that are not necessarily what I would call allies in the issues that I would advocate for, but they've met with me, and they have been, and they listen, and we debate and we talk. But it's become, but it's very important. I mean, it becomes a very important process. Certainly, in a lot of different groups, when you have like-minded communities, and I see this, and advance this a little bit. The League of Women Voters, for example, has at the state level there are what we call advocacy committees. And so in order to advocate and to become better informed about different issues, we have committee chairs that basically guide smaller committees through the legislative process that come up with 4 or 5, a handful of bills that we watch. And then we share the information about what's happening with the bills with our membership and anyone else who's interested. So for example, we have a criminal justice committee. So the criminal justice committee picked through their deliberation a set of bills that they wanted to follow, and so they disseminated this package to the rest of the membership. Education, which is the committee that I happen to sit on, and so as a committee we talked a little bit, and we decided on a handful of bills, because in the House Education Committee alone, there are over 100 bills that have been filed, and that's just on the House side. So there's probably not as much, but there's a significant number of bills that have been filed on the Senate side. So it can be very overwhelming. And that's where it becomes really convenient to have a group of like-minded, interested people who can sort of be with you through that process. There's an environment committee. So that committee has selected a handful of bills that they are following. Voter service, an issue that's very important to the league, and there's a handful of bills that they're following. So, and that's just decided to add some pictures. Moms Demand Action, which is that group where they had their lobbying day. People, that's the group that I work with, and we have, one of the things that we do, we've done, this is the 3rd year that we've done it, we host a legislative workshop where right before the legislative session starts, we invite the public. It's free. We invite the public, and we invite our area legislators to come. More often than not, it's a fraction of the area legislators, but in this particular session it was pretty bad because we had to catch them between the special session and the regular session, and of course that special session, I'm sure you know, was not a lot of fun, right? It was a lot of work, but so we had, this time we only had one legislator who actually came, but we had a lot of literature for people who came about the different bills, and so we created a couple of documents, just a couple of them, but this was categorizing all of the different House and Senate education bills so that they could, that just sharing that information, and then right behind that we handed them the emails and phone numbers and names of the committee members on the House side and on the Senate side, and then we also included our area delegation, the Lafayette delegation, because we wanted to encourage people to call or write, just to register whether or not they agree with a bill or they disagree with the bill. And what I've come to learn is that when you do that, the person who's answering the phone, the legislative assistant, she's taking a tally, right? Or he or she is taking a tally, and they're taking a tally of how many calls they're getting or how many emails they're getting. And so that, that is one way in which to influence that legislator. And I've heard legislators tell me this over and over again, that actually matters. It matters when people call. It matters when they hear from constituents, because so often they don't. I mean, it can be very difficult to navigate this process. Obviously, everybody, we have our everyday lives, and so that's probably one of the most important things that we do when we try to encourage our membership to advocate on a particular bill, is to just get their, basically register their vote, right? Register your vote, make a quick phone call, send a quick email. So that's become very important to us. And I think I'll stop here. I think I'll stop here, because I know it's been a while. Do you want to start some questions?
We encourage anyone in the audience to come to the mic and ask a question. We always ask our president to ask the first question if he has one, and I think he does.
I have several questions, and it's not exactly on the legislative process, but it is relative, it's important on educational issues, and I know y'all are into that full time. So I'm going to direct this to Kathleen first, and then I'll ask.
In the
you.
mic, Frank.
Okay. I'm going to direct my first question to Kathleen, and I'm going to ask that Sally follow up with her response. Here's my question. In recent months, the Lafayette sales tax collections have been reduced due to the slowing Lafayette economy. What are your thoughts on whether or not classroom teachers should be laid off before a reduction in the Lafayette Parish School Board central staff?
That's an easy question.
Yeah. I teach at UL, but I have 4 children in the public school system. My husband is a public school teacher. And for a long time, forever for me, it's about keeping the resources in the classroom. So in light of sales tax reductions, it is, I think, and I really think the school system has in a sense, to a certain degree, made that commitment to keep resources in the classroom. I will say, though, that there's sort of 2 approaches to that problem. One is you look at schools that maybe have a high at-risk population, and so that is, as a last resort, you would raise the teacher-student ratio there, which they haven't done. But I will say that beyond the problem of sales tax reduction, there's an additional problem of tax dollars going to the type 2 charter schools in Lafayette Parish. And there are 3 schools in Lafayette Parish, and one of the ways that the chief financial officer of the Lafayette Parish school system, Billy Goodry, explains it, is that if you have children who a population of students now that have gone to the charter schools, and it's probably close to about 1,800 students. You don't necessarily, they don't all come from one classroom, so you can't just take a teacher, you can't eliminate one teacher from one school from one classroom, because there might be four children here, 3 children there, two children here at different grade levels. So Billy Goodry has done a lot of analysis that there is a direct financial impact because of the introduction of those 3 charter schools. So that, I guess, that outlines the problem. But I think certainly, the central office, and I have to say, by my just armchair observation, I think Dr. Aguilar has definitely made some reductions in the central office
I think. I mean, that's my impression at least, that he's looked at the central office and he's made some changes too.
Well, I agree 100% with Kathleen, everything she said. And in my words, I guess the short answer is, keep as much as you can in the classroom, but it's like almost everything else in life. It's not as simple as it looks. I mean, when you say keep everything in the classroom, I mean, one of the problems that we had recently with this whole adoption of Common Core, for instance, had to do with the issue of professional development and how that was laid out. Now, where do you put that? Where does that come down? Is that money in the classroom, that professional development for the teachers? You must have to remember that teachers are professionals. And just like every other professional out there, professional development is integral to their success in the classroom. So first, I mean, I would have to parse out, where you put that. And other things we look at is, as Kathleen indicated, things like the whole charter issue, but also the whole tax structure. The way our taxes run, we send all of our taxes back over to Baton Rouge, and they redistribute them to us and everybody else around the state. And Lafayette, for better or worse, is considered a donor parish because there is a high level of income in this state. Not everybody, of course, enjoys that, but there is a high level of income, and so we're considered a donor parish. So we don't get as much back as many other parishes would. In fact, some of our taxes go to those parishes. So it's, again, like almost anything else, it's a thorny, complicated issue, but yeah, I think the bottom line is to keep as much in the classroom as possible.
My next question. I understand that Lafayette Parish School Board will be constructing a new school in the Broussard-Youngsville area due to the fact that it's one of the fastest growing student populations in the parish. Do you believe this is a prudent decision considering the number of existing classroom needs in other parts of Lafayette Parish?
Yeah, so that's complicated because while we talk about growth in the south side of the parish, there's classroom space in other parts of the parish, and one of the things with the whole schools of choice movement, and in an effort to make schools more diverse. We've run into this problem where we are transporting children all over the parish, and this is another side of that issue. There are a lot of kids in the Broussard and Youngsville area who actually go to school outside of Broussard and Youngsville. So we have a very by programs, because of the different programs that we offer, the system is very in some ways it's very integrated, in some ways it's very integrated, and certainly in the south side of the parish you've got we have the high school that the system is building, but also what's happened is that we've got a charter high school that is set to be built this year. They were approved back in 2013 by the State Board of Elementary and Secondary Education. So that high school, last I checked, they were discussing building it in the Bayou Tortue area and the intent was to make sure that it was somewhere halfway, but this was the Charter Schools USA company that is building the school, to accommodate the populations in their K-8 school regions. One is on the Evangeline Thruway, and one is not the Evangeline Thruway, Curray Farms in North Lafayette Parish, and the other one is in Youngsville. So now we have a scenario where we actually now are going to have two high schools, both financed fully by public tax dollars, serving most likely similar populations. So that, for me, this becomes an equity issue. That we have existing facilities in other parts of the parish that really need some attention. And so that's for me why getting the charter issue under control is so important.
I think Kathleen covered it.
Could I get a box?
This is my last question. Do you know the current projections for the student-teacher ratio for next school year? What are your thoughts, concerns, and recommendations about the student-teacher ratio given the economic downturn that we anticipate?
The only thing I know, and Ella might know this actually, I do know, I bet you can confirm this. If they've raised it, they voted to raise the teacher-student ratio, or they modified it. They changed, they adjusted the numbers a little bit, but they kept the teacher-student ratio low at what they would consider what Dr. Aguilar calls emerging schools now, which would, under the state accountability system, those would be D and F schools. So, yeah, and again, I guess this kind of goes back to the first question, is that, you know, the teacher-student ratio is certainly important. And I think, you know, Sally made a good point. You know, there are a lot of needs within the system. We talk a lot about facility needs, but we also, there are support needs that have to be in place. Teachers need support. Administrators need disciplinary support. There are technology issues in place, and you know, one of the things that in the circles that I walk in among education advocates, the state of Louisiana has a lot of what I would consider unfunded mandates, and one of the biggest ones probably is the accountability system that requires that our children take standardized assessments every year. Our children are taking our children are taking standardized assessments the minute they walk into school, and these are expensive. And now what's happening is the state is transitioning to a computer-based testing system, and as I'm sure you know, computers are not cheap, and oftentimes they're not really reliable. And but yet we're putting our children in this position, and that's become probably one of the most significant, I would say, financial burdens that we can't avoid. You know, we have to. I mean, I think about a year ago we had to allocate several $1 million in the middle of a budget crunch because we had no choice. And so that's actually become another issue of concern for us, certainly from the accountability perspective.
Yeah, I'll just say, I'll add one thing to that. I used to work for I used to work for the state Gear Up program, which was a college access program, and it worked with students starting in 7th grade, preparing them to be college ready by the time they finished high school. And we had $3 million to work with every year. $2 million of which we put into grants, small grants. We re-granted back to the schools that we worked with across the state of Louisiana, most of which were rural and low SES, socioeconomic status. I will say that the preponderance of use that grant money was put to was to satisfy these testing requirements, either practice tests, the tests themselves, which many of the schools the testing materials have to come out of the school budgets, or the computers on which to take the tests. So again, when you look at, you know, it sounds easy to say the money should stay in the classroom. You know, what does that look like? You know, is it buying computers just so students can sit at to take a test? Is it so that you can buy the testing materials instead of buying the manipulatives for them to actually learn with? So, I mean, these are things that have to be broken down, and I think it's a very complicated issue, and the idea that we're losing so much of our tax dollars to external educational facilities, what I consider the charter schools, I think we have to look at it very closely.
Shirley?
I want to thank y'all so much for all the information. I've learned a lot, but I can't contain it all in this meeting. I'm going to look it up online tomorrow. Since Lafayette and New Orleans are the only two cities designated as sanctuary cities, my question to you is, what criteria do cities use to become sanctuary cities?
I have no idea.
Well,
Does anybody know?
Does anybody know? I don't know. That's not, I'm sorry, that's not an issue that I'm familiar with. I'm sorry.
Repeat your question. What criteria does a city use to become a sanctuary city? Tom Andrews, you might know.
I can tell you, it depends on what Washington wants. That's exactly the reason. If they want you to have 10,000, you're gonna get 10,000, like it or not.
Well, there are many cities who have rebelled and have refused to become sanctuary cities. And from my research, I have found that it is against the law to allow these illegal aliens in here who have criminal backgrounds, but that law has been superseded by several organizations that have money to finagle themselves, and that's what I'm just wondering how Lafayette has allowed itself to become in this status.
Check with the Catholic diocese, they can tell you everything you need.
The Catholic diocese, or that would be something very interesting that you could, if this was an issue that it was of particular interest to you, and it seems that it is, I'm still trying to figure out how to get these kids out of the classroom, right? But if this is an issue of particular importance to you, and it seems like it is, go online and figure, track this, see who's talking about it. Call some members of your local delegation and see where they're going with it. Now, I'm sorry, it's just not, there are other things, in my opinion, that are a little bit more pressing at this level, so.
Mr. Glover? Well, first and foremost, thank you for coming. I've only got, 1.5 questions. My question is, how is League of Women Voters funded? And the second thing is, you all never answered his question. You just talked around it.
Which one?
What's the percentage of teachers to students?
I don't know. I don't know
About
the exact.
29 to 1.
It varies by grade
I think
level.
it's about
See,
29
there's an
to
answer.
1.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Well, it's a lot lower in the elementary.
Kathleen, come
Right
right
here.
here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's,
I got it right here, guys.
I think it's 23. It's like it's 23 at the elementary.
24 kindergarten through 3rd grade. 4th grade is 26. 5th grade is 29. 6th through 8 is 29. 9 to 12 is 29.
Yeah, and I think it's going to be, okay, so 29 in high school, middle school it's 26 or 20, and then elementary it's 24. But I think in other schools and at-risk schools, it's closer to maybe 14 or 15 to 1. Mm-hmm.
Correct.
And what was the other question? How's the League of Women Voters? So the League of Women Voters is funded just like you are. We have membership dues.
And part of our dues stay in the community for our local chapters, and part of it gets sent to our national organization. So we are linked at the national and the local level.
And part to the state.
And
And part to the state.
And part to the state, that's right. So we have local chapters, we have, Kathleen sits on the state board currently, and then we have our national organization, but it's really all funded by our dues, our member dues.
And
Unaccustomed as I am to asking questions, I have about 5. Number one, the PAR that you were speaking of, is this the same thing basically as the Congressional Research Bureau that they have in Washington? Wherever the legislatures have a legal question, they,
No, it's a totally independent, it has nothing to do with it.
oh, okay.
But do you want me to say that up there? I'll stay here with you, don't go too far. Okay. No, PAR is a totally independent organization. It doesn't have, it's not connected to the legislature in any way.
Both of you have mentioned a couple of times you hope, and they're supposed to do certain things, the legislators. Are there no requirements that they're held to? Because I know I've called several of them and I still have yet to get return
Yes, we
calls.
hold them to it. Kathleen, anytime
Yeah,
you want to jump
yeah,
up. I'm going to say quickly, the only accountability they have is from us And, you know, and I'll say the same thing about term limits. I don't think we need term limits. If we get out and vote, then, you know, that would take care of the term limits right there.
Well, I would just say for the past 3 years through when we have our legislative workshop and we try to reach out to legislators, there are consistently, you know, probably about 3 or 4 that have never ever returned our solicitation. So, I mean, that's just the nature of it.
Yeah, who teaches excuse making and justification? That's a good one. Perhaps someone might not understand what you mean by gerrymandering. Would you explain that, please?
Okay, well, when we set up our districts, our voting districts, you may know that we have some districts that run from the southern part of the state all the way up almost to Arkansas, and there's some pretty crazy shapes if you look at it. Gerrymandering is the practice of manipulating the shape of something so that it satisfies, in terms of districts, it would satisfy your goal and that district containing the type of voters that you want to be in that district. I think I was talking about gerrymandering in terms of, I said that, about the bill, about how when someone writes a bill, it gets sent through all those readings and it gets rejected, there's an opportunity then for the bill to be amended, and someone or a number of people could add amendments or riders to that bill, which would render that bill totally different from what it was in the first place. Okay?
Next question, basically, how strong is the union, the teachers' union here in Lafayette?
Let me get to the mic. So that's the, I think the group you're talking about is the Lafayette Professional Association of Educators. And so they have, or you know what, that's not a very comfortable slide for me, excuse me. They have a pretty robust organization. It's a professional association, like say the American Medical Association or something like that. They don't exercise collective bargaining in Lafayette Parish. In Vermilion Parish, actually, the Vermilion Parish Association of Educators actually does exercise collective bargaining, but in Lafayette Parish they do not. And generally what they do is they pay attention to the school board meetings, and they serve on committees in the Lafayette Parish school system, and they meet regularly with the superintendent, and they field issues among their membership. If there's an issue in a particular school a teacher has, and it's not just teachers, it's actually support personnel as well, or members of the professional organization. So I would say they're pretty active.
In the event we had a bad teacher and you wanted to get rid of one, would it cost $3 or $4 million to do that like it does in New York?
I think actually that's a myth. There is, I mean, you know, when teachers advocate, they're advocating for due process. But if there's a bad teacher and a principal wants to fire that teacher, there's actually a pretty spelled out process to do that. But the principal has to do their work, and they have to document the grievances, and the teacher or the support personnel has a right to due process in that. Because teachers they're professionals. They are putting themselves up in front of a group of students every day, and they're meeting with parents regularly, and so they're, like I said, they're professionals. They have advanced degrees. They are doing a lot of very complicated issues, and so I think the clause of due process is particularly important.
Last question in regard to the line item veto. Do the legislators have the right of line item veto?
I don't think so.
I'm sorry, repeat
A
the
line
question.
item veto?
Do legislators have the power of line item veto?
They don't in Louisiana. I don't know if they do in other states, but they don't have it here. It has to go to the governor.
I know in Washington, the president doesn't even have that power. And it's unfortunate that most people don't know why, because it puts them in another portion of the government. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Go ahead, Tom.
I thank you ladies for being here. I've been hearing about the League of Women Voters as long as I've been interested in politics. One of the biggest problems facing the state has been the fiscal crisis that has existed throughout my lifetime. You know, years ago there was a fiscal reform movement, if y'all remember, which petered out. if the state of Louisiana was a private corporation, it would have been in reorganization, bankruptcy throughout my lifetime, or probably in liquidation bankruptcy. Or if it started off in reorganization bankruptcy, a federal competent bankruptcy judge would have ordered it into liquidation. All the patchwork, you know, rear guard, knee-jerk responses, including gutting education, and we wonder why we remain 50th out of 50 in education. Have either of y'all or your organization, and locally or statewide, looked at some kind of comprehensive fiscal reform proposal? I think y'all be the perfect organization to make the legislature listen, you know, instead of this patchwork until the end.
Well, we had a taxing forum. Yeah, we had the tax forum. I thought was really.
Yeah, locally, we addressed our local taxes.
Yeah. We the league hosted a. That was just a week and a half ago, I think. Just a couple weeks ago. But we actually had all the taxing authorities in Lafayette Parish at the same table. So we had the school system, we had the sheriff, we had the sheriff's office, a representative. We had the Bayou Vermilion District, the Tesh Vermilion Freshwater District. We had the Airport Commission, sheriff, the tax assessor, Lafayette Economic Development Authority. And so they were sitting around the table basically lamenting the fact that we need structural tax reform. But the point I think that we walked away from, was there's no political will to do it.
Right.
There's a lack of political will for really comprehensive tax reform. And I don't know what it's going to take. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I hate to see what it's going to take for there to be real momentum in the other direction. I don't know. I mean, I just don't know.
I thought that a good idea would be to ask if you get some of the economics professors in the different parts of the state, you know, each university appoint an economics professor, perhaps the governor calling for a blue ribbon panel or something like that. Might be, I mentioned it to a local economic professor, you know, coming up with something comprehensive, and to continue to cut health and welfare and education. Some of these legislators are so dumb they can't connect the dots that economic development is related to educational achievement. Okay, they just don't get it. It's just that's simple, Simon. Some of them, you know. So, maybe y'all should look at that. If you get it seems to me politically, if all the universities had an economics professor or two on a committee, it'd be hard for the legislatures from that. The Acadiana delegation would have to look at what the UL economics department, and the same thing with Baton Rouge. I think it'd be politically beneficial, and if y'all would get behind it, most male legislators, will listen when there's well-organized women. So y'all should get after it.
Well, I think Kathleen kind of hit it on the head because these folks at this taxing authority representatives told us. I mean, they came out and said that they didn't see the political will there, and I mean, from my perspective, the only thing that's going to create that kind of will is us demanding that they do it. I mean, I don't know if it's a bunch of ladies with, not just ladies, Richard, with the League of Women Voters and other men who are involved in the organization, because, by the way, guys, it's now for everybody. But I know I'll just say this. I don't know if I work at a university. Kathleen works at a university. I love universities. I love higher education. But I just don't know if we're the answer to that. I remember several years ago, somebody may remember the particulars when maybe it was Mike Foster recommended maybe thinking about turning over economic development to the universities, the economics people. Guys, I mean, we're great, but we move so slowly. I think we've got the system in place. We just need to hold them accountable to developing that will. I don't think adding extra layers of bringing in the universities, but advising is fine. But that's just my perspective. I think it's on us to help these legislators develop the will that they need to move to fiscal reform.
Well, to me, I was just going to say, in a session like this, a year like this, I think that if we don't do it after this year, it's hard to imagine a worse scenario. I mean, it's really, where you would have probably university presidents, you have, you know, the healthcare system, you know, we don't know what's going to happen to the public healthcare system, where there's going to be real pain. And you know, I teach at UL, so what I hear about top scholarship, right, the tuition opportunity program, now my students are actually paying attention. And so if my students are paying attention, then probably their parents are paying attention. And that, you know, that may be part of the momentum that we need for legislators to say, hey, I'm getting a lot of phone calls about this. Maybe it's time for us to sit down and really do something about it. So hopefully, I mean, if there's hope out of...
I think part of the problem is people think fiscal reform is, there's a big anti-tax movement, you know, saying, you know, the fiscal reform does not mean tax increases. Okay, there may be some tax involved, but it's a massive wholesale, go back to, you know, I think it relates partly to the populist movement, the Huey Long movement, you know, homestead exemptions, all these kind of things, taking so many things off the table, you know, but anyway, I think it's something that needs to be put in progress and needs to push up and give us, we appreciate it. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, sir.
What do you teach?
Geography.
In reference to the financial problems, I just wanted to point out the legislative auditor's website. He issues an annual report on the state of the finances of the state. It's understandable. There's a really good graphs and charts. He looks across everything, and there's one 2014, 2015. They're right there on his website under reports. He also audits every single entity, public entity in the parish. You can see which ones are in the black and in the red. And the League of Women Voters has researched and used those sites a lot. But the legislative auditor is usually not listened to by the legislator. He is hired by them. He's independent. They can fire him and hire him, but other than that, they don't touch him. And another committee decides the salary from the legislature. But the legislative auditor would be a powerful figure in something like you're talking about, along with economists and political science people. But when you read the history of Louisiana, and there's a great 6th edition on the history, it's been the same up, down, the same thing with the OPEC in the 80s, all the way across. Nothing's changed really fiscally. We have good years and bad years, and we think we're doing good in the good years, and when we kick everybody in the bad years, but we haven't. You've got a great idea there.
Mr. Jim, come on up.
Thank you so much for being here tonight and informing us how to deal with the legislature, so to speak. And I know you're here more for education on the legislature than education itself. But I have a discouraging word that bothers me. You know, education, we all know how important it is. It was important for me, it's important for everyone. And these days, as we look at what's happening around the world and in the next years in our country, education is going to be even more important. Whatever the robots don't take over is going to require more education for our graduates. And here's what bothers me. Lafayette Parish, as I understand it, is rated somewhere toward the middle in Louisiana. I don't recall the number, but we're not in the top 10. Louisiana itself is rated like 48th, 49th. We're not in the top 10, somewhere near the bottom. And then if we look nationally, around the world, our nation is rated in some categories 24th in the world. It is very frightening to me to think of the future with these kind of statistics. I don't know how to ask a question about it. Perhaps, maybe, what can we do about it?
Well, I have a perspective. So I mean, it's a good question, and you know, I look at this from a geography standpoint. The international indicators, you know, a lot of countries that we were put on that list with, they actually are not including all of the students in their calculation. So, for example, you know, the United States has one of the most inclusive public education systems in the world. We educate every child, no matter, you know, what the challenge that child presents. In other countries, that's not necessarily the case. And they're not necessarily taking the assessment that's used to get to that measurement. So in some respects, I suppose we may look worse than we actually are, so to speak, because we do have such an inclusive public education system. On the other side of that, I don't have a lot of stock in ranking systems, even to a certain extent. I mean, there's something called the NAEP test, which has been an indicator for a long time among states in the United States, which is probably, experts would tell you, the most legitimate comparison across states. It has nothing to do with Common Core, it has nothing to do with the PARCC test, but this is something we've been doing for a number of years. And yes, we have, and another side of that is that those rankings are directly correlated with poverty, childhood poverty. And so oftentimes when I get in these conversations, I say, if you want to fix, if you want Louisiana's rankings to improve, you've got to start with getting people out of poverty. You've got to start with providing economic opportunity for people who really need it. And that can't be fixed by the education system alone. It has to be a community, a system-wide effort. So if you look at districts where they are at the top of the achievement, like say Massachusetts, you've got some of the highest per capita incomes that in the United States. So there's really a direct correlation between those measurements and income within the United States.
Anyone else for questions? We appreciate everyone. Oh, Jackie, come on up.
Well, can
You
I
got
just
some room
talk
here.
from here?
Well, I'll repeat the question
Can I
for
just
her.
talk from here?
You say it, Miss Jackie, and I'll repeat it.
She get by your chair.
Here, Jack.
Larry, you're a gentleman and a scholar.
You gotta get things done.
Technical.
Thank you, Larry. This is good. My question is, since our state is so much in debt and our money is so short, is there any talk in the legislature about refunds for taxes that you have paid into? Do they talk about money of refunding state taxes to the general public or to people who have refunds coming to them? I have heard of one that hasn't been paid since 2013. Refunds, income tax refunds. Do you have any talk about that?
You need to send the mic on. Thank you, Miss Jackie. But well, to begin with, they can't talk about it this year. It's a non-fiscal session. They're not allowed to talk about any fiscal matters or any major fiscal matters like that during this session. I know that during the special session there was all kinds of ideas thrown around, doing away with the personal income tax, doing other kind of tax credits. I don't know, I couldn't even follow it. I was getting whiplash. But they cannot take that up in this regular session. It would have to be either taken up in a second special session that may come in June following this regular session, or we may have to wait till next year, which is a year in which we could take on fiscal. Yeah, it would have to be soon. We're hoping it'll be soon, so a special session following the regular session. But don't expect to hear it in this session because they're precluded from talking about those issues. Okay?
Is there another question? Jackie, do you have another one?
No, and that's it. I just wondered if people are going to get their money.
That was a good question. Absolutely.
I know it is.
She probably hadn't got hers back for sure. Well, I just want to remind, on the 18th, we talked about the next meeting. We're having a gentleman that is running for the House of Representatives. And he's a school board member. It's Eric Konesic, I believe how you pronounce that last name. we're going to try and have all the people that are running for the House of Representatives to come and give their presentation, as well as the people running for Senate. So hopefully that y'all will be coming back to some of these same meetings, at least to figure out who you're going to vote for. I think it's important that you do that. And we appreciate y'all's presence. And if there's any questions concerning that, give me a call and we'll try to get it to you. And we appreciate the speakers for this evening. They've done a good job. There's certainly a round of applause. There's certainly the meeting stands adjourned, and we'll talk with you guys later. If y'all want to stay around and mingle and ask special questions, they'll give for a while at least. Thank you.
Sure good to see you guys.